Back in 2012, Italian courts convicted a group of scientists of manslaughter, a fact that was widely reported as the scientists being convicted for failing to predict a 2009 earthquake in which more than 300 people died. Now, I take issue with the conviction. I also take issue with the way it was being reported, because the actual conviction was about the scientists supposedly reassuring the general public, telling them that they shouldn't be concerned about a major earthquake coming just before a major earthquake did in fact come. The question is whether or not the scientists really said and believed this, or whether or not corrupt politicians goaded them into misrepresenting the actual science, which is that currently data doesn't show that many small tremors, many small earthquakes necessarily lead to a larger earthquake. It is currently impossible for scientists to predict where a major earthquake will strike and when. So you see, back in 2009, that's what was happening. There was a swarm of small earthquakes, and an amateur noticed this and started telling people that this meant that a larger earthquake was coming. People panicked, they fled their homes, they started sleeping in their cars, and politicians wanted to get everybody back to work. So they called upon these geologists to report to the world, hey, everything is going to be okay. And bam, a big earthquake hits and hundreds of people die. In retrospect, it looks like the amateur was right, but this is what is known as confirmation bias. It's the human tendency to remember the hits and forget the misses. So, for instance, if you think of a friend right before they call you on the phone, you might think of that as some sort of psychic phenomenon, but you probably have forgotten all of the times you've thought of your friend and they haven't called, or all of the times they've called you when you weren't thinking about them at all. It's the same thing with the earthquakes. People forget all of these swarms of earthquakes when a giant earthquake doesn't come after them, but they remember when it does, especially if there was a guy running around saying that the sky is falling at the time. That's why we have scientific data that we can look at, showing us all of the earthquakes that happen, whether they come alone or in swarms, whether they're followed by large earthquakes or not. I highly recommend getting an app for iOS called QuakeFeed. It's free and it pulls in data from the US Geological Survey. And it's awesome. It shows you all of the earthquakes that are happening as they happen around the world on a nice little map. And it'll show you, anything 1 magnitude and higher or 3 magnitude and higher, things like that. And it's just amazing to realize that every minute, we are walking around on this earth and tectonic plates are moving underneath our feet. And sure enough, these earthquakes that are 1 magnitude and higher are happening every minute or so somewhere around the world. Anyway, I'm talking about all of this now because, to bury the lead a little bit, 6 of the 7 scientists have had their convictions overturned, which is really great news, I think. The 7th guy, by the name of Bernardo de Bernardinis, he actually went to the press and told the general public that the smaller quakes were good news and that they should make people feel safer because that meant the Earth was getting out its energy without the need for a larger earthquake. This is complete and utter pseudoscience. And he has been sentenced to 2 years in prison. Is that fair? I don't know. I think so, though, because I believe that pseudoscience can be very dangerous. And I think when it is dangerous, the people responsible should be held accountable for their actions. In this case, 300 people, more than 300 people ended up dying. And in part, that was because of this pseudoscience. So I think that 2 years in prison probably is pretty fair. Although at the same time, I think that maybe they should go after those politicians next, but I won't be holding my breath.